Welcome to the podcast designed to fuel your success selling technology solutions. I'm your host, Josh Lopresto, SVP of Sales Engineering at Tybursky, and this is Next Level Biz Tech. Everybody, welcome back. We got a cool topic for you today. We're talking about licensing. We're talking about infrastructure, all those things. Specifically, we're talking about how licensing rules the game even when you don't see its adjacent reach. And on with us today, we've got a man who I've known a long time in the space, Mr. Ed Tybursky of Remend. Ed, welcome on, man.
Yeah, great to be here. Full circle,
I
so to
know.
speak.
Yeah. Crazy. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into kind of the topic of the hour here, fill us in just a little bit about you, kind of give us your, I'd like to hear everybody's life path on this story, right? How did you get into this space? Were you always destined for tech? And then kind of walk us through a little bit about what got you into this, and then we'll get into Remend.
Yeah, it's interesting. So no, probably like most people, I started this path in my life in the music. So I was a music theory and composition major that turned into law enforcement, which found myself becoming a programmer for a small actuary firm doing insurance software out of the Bay Area. So, full circle, I think I've touched pretty much every industry. That led me kind of into the voice and telecom area at Octel, Lucent, and then in the room when they named Avaya. And I remember thinking, this VoIP thing is never going to take off. This is a full man's game. And I went to print.com in the .com era, but that lasted about a whole 90 days. So full circle, I would say, little bit of everything in my career, really focused kind of more on the software end from a development perspective, and then ended up at a small startup in the Bay Area called GoBeam, which, if you're in the channel, if you're in telecom, you've heard of GoBeam. They were one of the pioneer UC providers back in the early 2000s. Some familiar names in the ecosystem. Stayed there about 5 years through the COVID, not to be confused with COVID.
Totally different.
The COVID acquisition, which I believe became Megapath to now Fusion Connect, some kind of way around that. But then moved over into architecture and was really focused on infrastructure for about a decade at Wells Fargo through the Wachovia merger, and kind of ended up through transition and faults and really kind of a bet in a way, meaning that I was more of a utility guy, and then started focusing on licensing kind of right around circa 2008, mostly for friends and consulting firms and just kind of helping them figure out some of the pitfalls. Mostly when you're working for a large enterprise, you're finding yourselves in these conversations often. So it's kind of a long road, but a lot of dips and turns, and here I am.
So I love the path. Walk us through, I guess, then. Okay, who's Remend, right? I mean, you're getting into some complex environments. You're in SAP and Oracle and all these things. I mean, what's your edge when you walk into those? And I guess, who is Remend for anybody that doesn't know?
Yeah, so Remend is primarily a software advisory firm. So we focus on tier one publishers. So if you think tier one, you think SAP, you think Oracle, Microsoft, IBM. Believe it or not, still a lot of IBM out there. What we do in the world of software is really think of it, and for your audience, think of it as TEM. So remove TEM and put in SAM, software asset management. We help people understand their usage. We do a forensic audit on the usability of all of their entitlements. We look back at certain dates of time, we compare that to their entitlements, and then we tell them a story of kind of how they're structured within their contract. So Remend is an independent firm. We've focused on not reselling. We focused on helping customers really understand the value of those entitlements. A lot of these contracts are legacy contracts, meaning that some, we've seen contracts from the 80s, right? So the value of those assets, it's kind of like a commodity, could be worth more, could be worth less. We help the customers determine that and then kind of set them on a path to really understanding what the value of the software is and the opportunity to lower that cost.
I love that. Such a different angle, right? I mean, I don't hear a lot of people coming at it, kind of wedging in, having a conversation like that. So it's got to be very well received on, oh my gosh, finally somebody that understands this, right? That speaks our language.
Yeah, one of the differentiators I would say for us, in particular around the space, is that we're not, these publishers aren't bringing us business. We're not on the hook in any type of compliance partnership with them. And a lot of the major firms, particularly the big four, rely upon revenue, specifically from SAP and Oracle in a lot of these environments. So are you really getting kind of that independent technology advisory conversation happening with these large firms? So there is an opportunity, for us into entering these conversations saying, look, we're going to take an independent, holistical view. We're motivated to help you save money. We're not motivated to provide you with a bunch of implementation services that are correlating to our relationship
Yeah.
with Oracle, if you will. So it's a little bit of a different kind of niche there in our approach.
So take us back, right? Through all this experience, I'd love to hear about the lessons that people have learned along the way, right? Whether we've stubbed our own toe or we've had a great mentor that we've been surrounded with. What's a lesson that you learned that's kind of stuck with you?
There's a lot, right? So there's a lot. I mean, you and I are a lesson. We met, what, 10 years ago or so. And
Yeah.
it took me X amount of time for us to really start kind of gaining momentum in this pillar. I think the biggest lesson, in my world, language matters. And what I mean by that is that if a customer is under audit with a particular vendor, what we say can have dramatic effects to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. So, some of the lessons you learn along the way is, you flip up, you make mistakes, spend a lot more time listening versus kind of dictating. And then it kind of translates to, some of the way that I've had mentors tell me some of the best opportunities come from listening. So the lessons that I would say the biggest lesson I've learned is to listen more, to stop talking as much as I do, because we're technicians. We just love to architect
Yeah.
24/7. But sometimes that has gotten me in trouble. I would say long ago, you say a little too much, you give a little too much away, and then all of a sudden, things tend to walk away from you. So I think I really center on that. Obviously I've been in this field since the 90s. So there's a lot of little things that I could probably illustrate, but I would say, yeah, cornerstone around listening.
Fair. Okay, so let's before we kind of get into present day and start talking about like some of this, we're talking a little bit about it, right? Some of this adjacent reach that licensing gives
Yeah.
you. I mean, walk us back through early days discovery calls as you kind of got into this space. What were they like? What did you learn about uncovering needs? Like I think advisors love to hear how
Yeah.
people uncovered and maybe walk us through what you did early and what you learned there.
Yeah, the earliest days were a little bit more reactive, right? So I think this is where kind of the markets have changed a little bit. So if you go back circa 2010-ish, around that area, a lot of the inbound was very reactive. So I call it ambulance chasing, kind of like, the lawyers waiting in the emergency room for their auto victim to come, and they can make a ton of money. And there is a lot of money that happened in that, but it was such a reactive, meaning that when you're looking at publishers like Oracle, they're so punitive to the customers, right? So, if there was a customer we had, they literally cure cancer. I mean, that's their business. They were looking at kind of a compliance situation of $1 million. And when I explained to them that Oracle will take the $1 million in lieu of, you curing cancer, it was a little bit of an eye awakening for them. And so in the early days, a lot of it was that it was really reactionary. So business was just coming, so it's kind of like, who do I call? Right. So, we're not Ghostbusters, but we are Remend, and they're calling us, and we're getting them out of these hurdles. And, through a lot of remediation and consulting and just how their view of software has happened. I would say over, today things have changed a little bit. I know we'll kind of get into that, or I can get into it now, but, the market is shifting to more of folks looking at kind of a proactive approach, in particular in the economic climate. Like, what is our future state going to look like in the licensing world? You know, Oracle had Oracle did a significant kind of or I would say, a unique presentation where they still, 71% of all infrastructure is still on prem, right? We think cloud is this major transformative, initiative, that it's all too late. We're all too late to the game. But as of October, 71% of all workloads are still on prem.
Which
You
is
know, so,
which will interrupt you for a second, which is crazy because coming fresh off of doing Google Next and doing reInvent, here we are. I mean, I started playing with AWS maybe 0809 when it had two services. Now it's approaching $100 billion run rate. Google's approaching a $50 billion run rate, and yet I think that's great to call out. 71% is still on prem.
still on prem, still opportunities, still hyperscalers are still investing in moving these workloads and kind of transforming. We can get into some of the data tiers related to what AWS is doing with Aurora and how they're attacking these workloads. But the reality is, the core systems that are running your customers' businesses are still in a data center, are still in a rack, are still in an old piece of infrastructure that, because of licensing and how it affects it, there's a little bit of dust on it, but they're just blowing on it and hoping and praying it doesn't go down, and that's quickly coming to an end where, folks, it's getting more and more expensive. Infrastructure is aging. It's starting to retire. What is the opportunity there? I think it's still vast, to be honest.
I mean, yeah, let's dive into that, right? You talked about what AWS is doing, what they're seeing with Aurora, compounding on the Oracle. What's some of your thoughts there?
I think, from a transition perspective, it makes a lot of sense. They're funding changes, right? So AWS is coming in saying, look, if you have Oracle workloads, we'll fund the transformation to Aurora. It is interesting. Does it work? Some of the times. Some of the times, there's a Postgres component. There's Hadoop. There's a lot of other variants and flavors. At the end of the day, Oracle still makes the best database server. It just does. These investments that folks have made, particularly in Oracle, they're binding, meaning they can't get out. So if you do these migrations, you're still on the hook for the licensing elements of it. So it is slowing some of that adoption. While it's being funded, it sounds like a great story. It really may not be the option of your customer. And as a technology advisor, this is where you kind of enter in and say, listen, we have some solutions. Now, Aurora might make sense for AWS. Does it make sense for you as an organization? How about you look at these hybrid solutions? And when you start looking at companies like Expedient and what they're doing and some of the other, I would say, hybrid environments, or even the hyperscalers, even Rackspace and kind of, these other organizations that were kind of legacy names in the industry, they are providing unique things and housing for some of these infrastructures. And the answer is, when you go to a hyperscaler, in particular with Oracle, you could have hundreds of thousands of dollars of impact on licensing because of the way Oracle interprets a core. So it gets a lot more complex, and it's one of those ones that we can get off on a tangent here. So I want to be
Yeah.
careful to go back
No,
a
it's
little.
fair. No, it's a good call out. I mean, I think the theme is that people need to not forget is that AWS has map funds. Azure migration, there's funds. Google now rolling out, now that we've got opportunity to monetize this on our channel and the supplier base, people like RapidScale, things like that. There's ability to do migrations. These guys are hungry to do it. So I love, I don't want people to forget that call out. So no, that's good.
Yeah, that's an important one.
Okay, so let's. I like to always kind of talk about how we think things are going to go versus how they actually go. And so if you
Yeah.
think about this as the deals have grown and you're in these customer conversations, when did you start realizing that, maybe what the client thinks they need, that's like, I need this ERP license, is really just the start of another a bigger conversation?
Luckily, that's kind of the cornerstone of our business. So, a lot of the impact is, I need this, I need to buy this, right? And it correlates to licensing. When they say, in particular with ERP, I need more ERP users. Great. Let's analyze usage. Let's understand what Mr. Lepresto as an individual has done over the past 18 months. And this is where it kind of crosses into the TEM conversation, right? Oh, he's logged into the system one time. Well, there's an annual cost associated with this. And you have Betsy over here that's doing X, Y, and Z. And when you start looking at the enterprise ecosystem of usage, it really changes that conversation dramatically. Two, no, you don't actually need to buy more, right? The conversations now shift to, you can actually reduce here, and maybe you're over provisioned by 200. Now what do we do? And by the way, if you get off of this aging infrastructure and you remove yourself, and we kind of leverage some of these hybrid conversions, I can probably save you about 100,000 a year of OpEx because we can drop X, Y, and Z. So every conversation for us is leading in from an infrastructure perspective, combining with licensing. They're always tied into together. I can tell you from my experience, every customer, we all have this handled. Everything's handled. And we start going down path one, and honestly, we always end up on path 17. The variant of options is this is where it goes back to listening. You're listening to the customer's needs, but then you're also giving them options. And how we determine the best path to go forward is we provide data and real costs associated with those environments, saying, here's the fiscal impact of making these decisions. You can do whatever you want. We're just here to provide you options. And if you want to write a $10 million check, I'm not here to stop you. Please go right ahead. However, this conversation I had earlier today is, don't write the $10 million check. Why don't you write a $400,000 check instead? And, you start having these unique entry points into conversations, and then with departments that you probably have never touched before, right? So it's
Yeah.
it's a broad question to answer, I would say, for us.
Well, we talk about this, at the events, and we talk about what, we put out the tech trends report, and some of the things that initially showed us was, okay, people are looking at cost cutting,
Mhm.
but cost cutting to fund innovation. So what might seem like on the surface to somebody that, if a customer comes to you and says, I want to look for some analysis on my license, and you think, I don't know if there's any money to be made on that. Well, here you are. If you save some money on those licensing, how many times are you saving the money on that licensing to fund the migration to the infrastructure, to fund the migration somewhere else, right?
All the time. That's the freeing of OpEx in relation to what they're already using. And let's be clear, when we're restructuring, it's contractual. It's not functional in a sense. So folks aren't, you're not going to your laptop and, all of a sudden something's missing. And if it is missing, it's possible in the sense, but you've never used it. So if that's the day you want to decide to use that functionality and all of a sudden it is gone, it is a different conversation with management, kind of going up and saying, this is something I need, but that's a fraction of what we're doing. In the Microsoft world and how we attack Microsoft, and where a lot of the audience is going to be interested in is, yes, we've had the opportunity to lower seven figures of OpEx that have shifted to some of the providers, in particularly in the UC and CCaaS space, that basically we saved them the run rate within Microsoft, and it funded their digital transformation initiative. So it really, and how did it fund that? Well, we're pulling the SIP logs. So part of the output is we understand the way usability has, and believe it or not, they had an asterisk system. And so you kind of look at it and say,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Global rollout and asterisks. Oh yeah, we're in 68 countries. And so you start having these conversations, and it's just the path just keeps opening and opening up, but it's all just data driven, and it's all starts with licensing, which is really interesting if you think about it, because it's not so much we need to cost save and where are we going to, there's the usual places to look, and easily grab, these savings. The hard part in software is you really have to forensically look at it and understand usage over an 18-month period, right?
Yeah.
And then, but it does paint the story.
Yeah. Good point. All right, let's go into an example. So walk us through something that starts in one lane, ERP software, infrastructure, and just ends up pulling through all these other things. I mean, walk us through how a deal like that transpires, or what was the turning point?
Well, we can use a couple examples. One is a lot of software audits kind of lead into a lot of digital transformation, but specifically, I can just pull one out, and I'll use the Microsoft example. It really was a restructuring of an enterprise agreement on a termed agreement, which we can't participate in anyways. Let's be clear, right? So it's
Right.
kind of one of those ones that there's an EA. So from an opportunity, it leads into really, why are you doing this and what is your roadmap, and then just start having the roadmap conversation on one example. Another example is digital transformation. You get into kind of these infrastructure pieces, and as you're pulling out data, you're seeing rapid 7 in the environment. You're having conversations on the database, and then a provider's coming in talking about an XDR within a certain element on a single host, and the CISO's losing his mind, and you're then switching to, you shouldn't be this excited about a Trellix XDR instance on a single host. What are you doing for your entire security posture? So in our world, there's not one example. I can give you 1,000 of literally the deployment of the specific entitlements have a correlation to what their infrastructure is doing and how they're changing. But specifically, we've had a lot of telecommunication pivots just from the SIP analysis that we're pulling out of the M365 environment and saying, great, you have a Cisco on-prem. That's amazing. I understand that. You have 5,000 calling plans with Microsoft. No, we don't. Yeah, you do. Here's the data. So you don't have a Cisco strategy. You have a Cisco strategy with your employees are just providing calling plans for Teams integration. It's a very different data-driven conversation. So
Do you find, I guess, in let's playbook some of these engagements a little bit. I mean, start us off with, and I know the stat is that 62% of all stats that are made up. So let's make up our stat to our best effort here. What percentage of the time do you feel like the customers even expect the conversation to pivot when you uncover things like this?
Never, never. They're surprised. It's always a surprise. It's pretty much, I would say, 90% of the time it's a surprise in calling out. Um, it's interesting because you mentioned rapid scale. I can't tell you how many times I hear, oh, well, we're thinking of doing this, or it's being led by AWS, or we're with a single vendor, and then you start kind of peeling back with these CIOs and IT directors and saying, what is the motivation of this planning, and what are you truly trying to do? And it's always such a single layer approach. And so, as a TA, you're always looking at a multi-layer approach, right? Bringing in yourself and your team to kind of understand, look at this holistically, and say, what is the path that let's follow? But what was the impression of the customer? How did we get there? We were probably having an Oracle conversation. And he said, "Oh, by the way, we're considering migrating our entire database, our entire ecosystem to AWS." And my comment was, "You have 16 data petabytes of storage. How do you possibly believe you're going to do that?" Well, AWS said, and now you're in a conversation that just pivoted. Did he expect to be there? No. But did I listen? And then the conversation kind of organically had happened. So, when you look at in an Oracle world, believe it or not, there's still Siebel out there, still a thing. By the way, the CIO, hey, we're how do we get out of Siebel because we need to move to Salesforce? Interesting. You're moving to Salesforce. How are you handling your CX? Well, we're looking at X, Y, and Z. We can help you with that. And those are some of the conversations that come out. That's why I said the pivot for me is a little bit interesting because as a TA, in a sense, you're always listening and trying to provide value. And a customer once told me, he said, the greatest value to you isn't that you save me in compliance, is that I can call you for anything and you'll point me to a number of vendors that will be able to provide me a solution to save me time and research. And I always liked that he said that to me. So
Yeah, I like it. Let's go sell him some more stuff.
yeah,
Um, so, okay, so let's think about this.
yeah,
I like to talk about the ripple effect.
hmm
So there's a lot of ripple effect in these tech decisions, and I think it's hard to, if you don't have that radar up, if you're not looking for these things, you don't know quite what that ripple effect is. So how do you walk into these conversations, help the clients understand this downstream impact when you're thinking of that licensing and platform? Is it just a, I don't think you need that, and that just takes the shock off, or what's, how do you navigate that?
it's long. It's a long process. So nothing I'm saying just happens overnight. There's a lot of the larger the organization, the larger the ego. So you have to overcome. It's typically the most junior person has the largest bite. So a lot of barking. We leverage data. So the data, like I said, when we give X amount of options, it can get up to 17 different paths you can go. But the data and the numbers, luckily for us, the CFO consumes a lot of the output that we have. Why? Because it has a financial impact. And if there's reasoning in relation to why that's going to happen, they'll typically listen. How we get there really is leveraging publishers and providers within your portfolio, right? So they've been vetted. They have financials. They have a financial standing. They have status. They have references, and it's something you can go to a customer and say, "Listen, this is a well vetted organization, and this is how they stack up." So they're looking at a company like us that has just saved them $100 million and giving them kind of a recommendation and saying these are some of our valued providers that are you're able to kind of leverage. Now, like I said earlier, the bigger you are, the longer it takes. The average deal in kind of the enterprises could be up to 18 months.
Yeah.
It's the way it is, right? But crisis also can advert and rapidly speed that up. So we see that a lot too. So it's an interesting kind of way in our world that we approach this. But is there any kind of secret into navigating it? Trust. It just comes down to trust. It took me a long way to get there, but trust. When they trust you and you've provided valuable service and valuable recommendations, they will pretty much bring you to the seat of the table to at least give an opinion on whatever it is that they need.
So for those advisors then that are have sold a single product to this customer
Mhm.
and they want to go expand that dimension, what's your advice for spotting those pivot points or calling out those pivot points that then open up the next 16 paths?
I think a lot of it is just understanding the roadmap, right? Get out of the weeds. So I see a lot of advisors really in the technical weeds with folks, and and it's just our nature, in particular, if we've come as from a solutions background, that we want to just get our hands on the keyboard. I mean, it's still to this day, it's really hard for me to just not do it all. You have to have a strategy meeting. Talk about trends. A lot of the content within here and a lot of the stuff that's coming out of, I would say, even Tularis University, leverage a lot of that stuff to kind of put in your own words and have established QBRs with your customer where you're talking about trends, and something may just dawn and a light will go off and say, oh yeah, we've actually been thinking about that. If you're not present in your customer, they will move on without you, right? Some of my best success has been from, what are your goals over the next 18 months as an organization? Where are you trying to go? If they're in retail, that's a great one right now. Obviously, they're not selling a lot of sweaters. What's your approach over the unforeseeable future that your supply chain may be squeezed by the current economic climate? These are conversations. We have some quick wins. Maybe you're in a mobility discussion. Maybe you're in a TEM discussion. Maybe you're in, leveraging your core kind of around where your expertise are. They're all looking for solutions. Um, I was on the call yesterday with the VP of IT of a large brand. He said, "When can you fly down to Studio City to have lunch? I want to show you everything we have." So it just
Oh,
yeah. It's good. I hope you're not busy next week.
yeah.
um, it's just I think my advice really is just try as hard as you can to understand what their objectives are over the next 18 months.
Yeah, the the QBR thing is great. I would love to see more out of that. More people doing that because show me something that hasn't come from sitting down with one of your great customers in a QBR, right? Just that I think some people struggle to find, well, what's the right way for me to approach this customer that now I need them to know that I'm confident in helping in all these other areas. And I'll never forget one of the eye opening moments a year or two ago with a partner that had a big customer, and we had sold hundreds of thousands of dollars, 4 or 5 different products over the years to this customer. This is the guy that is the contract signer. I mean, he intimately knows all the products that we have sold, right? He's been in all the discussions, and he said, "Hey, I got a question for you guys." Yeah, oh yeah, you bet. How do you guys get paid again? And we go, dude, this is like year 4 into the relationship.
Yeah.
Like you trust us that much that you don't even care, that you haven't thought about it, you haven't asked about it. I'm sure we've brought it up numerous times, but it gives you context to go, these people are in a different world. They have priorities, they have things, they need to be have these strategy sessions drawn out. So I love that call out. Challenge everybody to go do more of your QBRs with your top customers. Like nothing bad is going to come of that.
No, you shouldn't be afraid to get in front of them at any point. I mean, we're in a relationship business. Trust is formed by relationships, and absolutely get in front of your customers and keep bringing it up. All they can tell you is no, you know, or hang up on you,
Yeah.
but just call back.
It's all right, man. For all the 9 no's, the one is a yes. That's all
Yeah,
that matters. What's the batting average example I got to use? You only got to hit 3 out of every 10 to make it in the Hall of Fame. Like
yeah.
it's not that bad.
It's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Okay, final thought here. I guess as you think about this, we got an evolving landscape. We got just weird times where people are looking to optimize and then figure out also have to invest for AI. I mean, all these trends coming out. What's your kind of advice to bring this home, and what do you see as maybe just some of the next triggers, the next things to unlock opportunities coming up?
Well, I think I could talk about a couple things. So one is software, right? So if you're looking at software, and we talk about that 71% of infrastructure on premise, these publishers are motivated to migrate their current spend in the millions with an uplift, right? They don't know the value of their assets, and really put yourself kind of in the middle of these conversations, because a lot of publishers are going to bully their customers into making long-term decisions, right? Or locking them into things that they may not be aware of. And why? Because they don't have time, right? So it's just, the reverse of, they didn't understand how some folks are being paid to. They have trust in the platform. Obviously, they're just going to migrate and look at these opportunities. But make no mistake, these vendors are getting aggressive. They're also adding a lot of the components that pertain to some of the folks watching this. So you want to keep top of mind that changes are happening. They're looking at infrastructure changes. Publishers are changing them to lock-ins where they're leveraging a hyperscaler through a subscription model that only they control, and they set the terms and the price. So that is happening within everybody's customers today, right? So it's always great to just stay aware of what's going on and what the changes might be, because you never know what kind of opportunity. They might just be shopping for a new ERP. You never know, right? If you don't ask the question. So as far as on the AI front, AI is everywhere, right? So, and I've told a lot of advisors this. We've done a lot of it. We've done a lot with AI. The interesting thing with AI is it's not a one size fits all. It's never going to be. And one department may use a yellow, the other department may use a core. You may have Genesis creeping in, and next thing you know, there's 5 different implementations. We have a customer that's using 4 different vendors to solve 12 different problems within their ecosystem. So, AI is going to continue to evolve. It's never going to be a set and forget. It's going to be a constant conversation you want to bring up in your QBRs. How is this working? Attrition does matter. Are you getting value? And continuously having those conversations within your customer base, because you never know. One vendor is great for one, another vendor might be great for a second thing, X, Y, and Z. So what I can say globally, though, if I tie it all together, there's some interesting things that are happening kind of in the network space. Meter is something that we're really interested in looking at, primarily on what, in our how we're handling smart net negotiations, and then kind of looking through an OpEx model and kind of changing some of the infrastructure and lowering costs through, some of the renegotiations we're doing at that level is pretty interesting. But the landscape to some eyes, software, obviously AI is already there, but even in networking, everything's going to an OpEx model. So everybody is Broadcom, right? I mean, we all know what Broadcom did. Subscriptions are the way, right? These companies want to offer, they want to manage their businesses on a subscription model. And I mean, for heaven's sakes, I bought for a customer, we helped them procure like an old Maximo environment that's like old as old. People still use it. And IBM wanted to sell them a subscription for on-prem, so it's everywhere. Every customer wants to put everybody in this type of subscription. So I would say for me, in my world, over the next 5 years, every publisher, every company is going to be putting a gun to their customer's head and saying, you need to buy our subscription for something that may or may not have value to you in your runtime.
Yeah. I love it. That's a great place to wrap. Ed,
Yep.
Good to catch up. Appreciate you coming on. Awesome
you.
topic, man. Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Everybody, that wraps us up for today. As always, don't forget, you can catch this every Wednesday when it drops, Wednesday morning. Catch it on Spotify, Apple Music. Be sure to follow, subscribe, all that good stuff so that you get these before anybody else does. So until next time, I'm your host, Josh Lopresto, SVP of Sales Engineering at Telarus, Ed Tybursky of Remend. This has been How Licensing Rules the Game, even when you don't see its adjacent reach. Thanks, everybody.
Next Level BizTech has been a production of Telarus Studio 19. Please visit Telarus.com for more information.